subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
Hello everybody and welcome to this month's webinar from Simon Sez IT and StreamSkill. We hope everyone is well. This is Adam here, and I also have the marvellous Deborah Ashby on the line, waiting to tell us all about basic forecasting in Excel. Before we get started, a couple of bits of housekeeping. You might see the chat in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Do say hello. Hello, Roy. Thanks for dropping the first message in there. At the very top of that chat, there's actually an Excel file that you can download if you want to follow along. We've got organised this week. Well, I say we. Debs has got organised and remembered to get the file ready, and because I'd completely forgotten, of course. So we have that ready. It's in there. Let me know if you can't download it for any reason. We have had some issues with that in the past. If not, do not worry. We will be putting up the file on the blog with a recording of this for you guys tomorrow. So if you miss anything, you want to rewatch anything, then that is absolutely fine. Hello, Jerry. Hello, everybody else who's dropping us notes into the chat. Do let us know where you're from. It's great to see so many people from so many different places. Debs and I, of course, in the UK this evening here. And two quick things to mention before we crack on with the presentation this evening. So the first is that we have just launched two new courses actually. One of them you may have seen in the newsletter last month, Advanced Pivot Tables. So we did a webinar on that last month. We've actually got the full course out now. That's available if you log in as a member. And likewise, the Introduction to Python course. So Python programming language, if you've ever thought about or been interested in learning how that works, we've got a fantastic introductory course there. So perfect if you're brand new to Python or even brand new to coding. So do go and check those out, and obviously let us know how you get on with them and if you enjoy them. Great, thank you everybody. Brilliant to see all your comments. Right. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Debs, who's going to talk you through basic forecasting in Excel, and I'm going to go on mute, and then I'll be here at the end for any questions. So if you have any questions, do drop them in the box just down there in the chat. I'll keep a note of them, and then we'll ask Debs at the end to run us through any of those. Cool. Thank you, everybody. Speak soon.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Adam, for that wonderful introduction, as always. Good afternoon or good evening from the UK to everyone who's joining us today. I hope you're all well. We're all still pretty much in lockdown, so it's still a bit of a strange situation. I'm at home, and I apologise if you can hear children playing outside at this time of night. They tend to come out, but hopefully that won't cause too much of a distraction. Now, I'm not going to run over too many things that Adam has already mentioned, but I will say that if you have any questions during the webinar about the content that we're covering, then you can drop them into the chat box, because Adam's knowledge in Excel is actually better than I give him credit for a lot of the time. So he might be able to answer some of your questions. If not, I will leave some time at the end of the session to run through those. Now, our webinars normally run for roughly an hour. I think we might get away a little bit earlier this evening because there isn't as much content in this one as in our normal webinars. But I think you're going to find it really useful, particularly if you do the kind of roles where you might be asked to do some basic forecasting. Now, I know we've probably got a lot of our regulars on today, but for anyone who's joining us or is new to our webinars, I'll just very briefly introduce myself. So my name's Deborah Ashby, and I'm a freelance IT trainer, and I specialize in Microsoft products. So my job basically involves the design, delivery, and facilitation of Microsoft training and courses, both online and in the classroom. And I've been using Excel for a very, very long time, since about 1995. Makes me feel very, very old. But the thing I love about it most is that it's always changing. So there's always new stuff to learn. And we're going to focus on some of that newer stuff today as we get into talking about forecasting in Excel. So let's take a look at what we're going to cover. Now, this is a basic forecasting session. We could go a lot deeper into this. There is quite a lot to forecasting once you get into it, but I'm going to take it from the standpoint that you're completely new to forecasting, and we're going to start from the beginning. So I'll run through with you just some basics of what exactly forecasting is. I'm going to show you a couple of different types of forecasting that we're going to be exploring in the session today. I'm going to show you how to do some forecasting using a couple of functions which I'm going to guess you've probably never used before, SLOPE and INTERCEPT. So that's quite exciting. There is a little bit of maths. I'm just warning you now that you're going to feel like you're back at school in the beginning part, because we are going to do a little bit of maths. We're then going to move on to the easier way of forecasting, which is using Excel's inbuilt forecast functions, and the main one being FORECAST.LINEAR. I'm going to show you how you can incorporate using named ranges to make your forecasting just a little bit more efficient. I'm going to show you another way to forecast using another Excel function, the trend function, and we're going to throw in with that some array functions. Again, if you're not sure what I mean by that, I'm going to explain all of this when we get to it. And then finally, we're going to use forecast sheets, or what we like to call one-click forecasting. It's not technically one click, it's a couple of clicks, but it is a lot quicker if you're just trying to get a very basic forecast. So it's a really nice little utility that's fairly new to Excel. So I'll show you how all of that works as well. And of course, we couldn't do forecasting without throwing in some charts somewhere in the mix. So we're going to be taking a look at a couple of charts where we can see a forecast and also trend lines and things like that. So hopefully that's what you were expecting from the session today. As I said, I'm going to try and keep it reasonably basic, but hopefully interesting. So let's start out with that first question. What is forecasting? Well, really, forecasting is just predicting future values based on historical values and trends. So if you can imagine, it might be that you work in a sales team and you've got data, your sales data for the last 3 years, and you want to use that to predict what your sales are going to be for next year. That would be what we consider forecasting. Or it might be that maybe you want to work out what stock prices are going to do over the next 3 months based on what they've done in the previous year or 2 years, something along those lines. Or in a situation like meteorology, the weather, we all look at the weather forecast. That's based on trying to predict what the weather is going to do. Now, that incorporates data and lots of other different kinds of factors as well. And one thing I will say to you is if you are forecasting data, don't take it as an exact science. It is definitely not an exact science. Forecasting is very much kind of doing a best guess based on the data that's gone before it. Okay, so it can give you a good idea of what your sales are going to look like in the future based on what has gone before. Now, as I said, we're going to use many different techniques to look at forecasting in Excel, but this is just kind of a little example, and we're actually going to recreate this example. You can see here we have some dates. I have some sales figures in columns A and B, and then right at the bottom, you can see that I've forecasted what those sales might look like based on what has gone previously. And I've also got a little chart on there, a line chart, which is showing me that forecast. The forecast is shown in orange, and it's also showing me a confidence level. Now, I'm going to get into exactly what that is when we come to create this little chart, but that's kind of what it looks like once you've set it up. Now, when it comes to forecast functions in Excel, there are two main ones that you're probably going to utilize most frequently. The first one is FORECAST.LINEAR. Now, I've got a little description under there, and I am very well aware that just explaining it or saying this description doesn't really give you an idea of what it does. So we are going to jump into an example in a moment. But basically, this function predicts a Y value, so something like sales, for a given X value. So that might be a date. And what you need to do is provide the known Ys, so the known sales, and also the known X's, which might be the known dates. in order to get your forecast using the FORECAST.LINEAR function. The other one that you might see in use, which is fairly common, is forecast. I've put EPS there. It's ETS. I'm sorry, I've made a typo there. It stands for exponential triple smoothing. And this is a way of forecasting which also incorporates other information. So it does things like estimates trends, it estimates seasonality, and it gives the most weight to the most recent data point. So it is a little bit different to the linear forecast. Now, you might think, well, okay, that doesn't really make too much sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into examples where hopefully it will all become a little bit clearer. So let's jump across to our Excel spreadsheet. So this is the spreadsheet that's been dropped into the chat pane. So if you have it open, please feel free to follow along with me. Now, the first thing that's really important to point out here is the version of Excel that I'm using. So I'm using the latest version of Excel, which is, I have Microsoft 365 or Office 365, which is always constantly updated. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because some of the functions aren't available in versions older than 2016. So if you're using 2016, 2019, or Microsoft 365, you're probably going to have all of the functions I'm going to show you. If you're on something older, you may not. Now, a good way to check before we get going is if in a cell you just type in forecast, that's going to show you all of the forecast functions that you have available. So that's a nice quick way of checking to see what you have. Now, we've got quite a few in there. We're really going to focus on FORECAST.LINEAR. Now, you'll also see at the bottom, I have a forecast function, but it has a little warning symbol next to it. Now, if you see that, basically forecast is the old function in Excel, which has now been replaced with FORECAST.LINEAR. Okay, so FORECAST.LINEAR and forecast are essentially the same thing. And depending on which version of Excel you're using, you may see FORECAST.LINEAR or forecast. Okay, so that's just a good one to check to make sure that you're using a similar version so that you don't get confused as we go through this session. All right, now let's delete that out. Now, what we're going to start out with, I'm going to move on to those forecast functions in the next exercise. What I want to start with is using two functions called SLOPE and INTERCEPT. Now, you may never have used these before or never have heard of them, but they are functions that you can use to do forecasting. So, for example, I've tried to make this really simple. We've got some X values here and we have some Y values. And my X values are just 1 to 12. And then I have some Y values listed just here. Now, my X values are just moving up by 1 every time. And if it helps you to understand this a little bit better, you could maybe think about these as maybe months of the year. And my Y values, maybe you want to think of those as maybe some sales figures. So these don't have any particular pattern in the way that they're increasing. There's no standard. It's not increasing by 2 every time. It's not increasing by 5. It varies, okay? Now, what I want to do here is essentially, when X is 13, I want Excel to tell me what the Y value is going to be. And we can do that by essentially forecasting it using the SLOPE and INTERCEPT functions. Now, what we're trying to do here when we're forecasting is, if you imagine this on a chart and you've got a trend line running through, we're trying to kind of calculate a straight line. We want the straightest line through this data in order to predict our next number. And what we're going to do here is we're going to utilize a little equation. And this is what I mean. This is going to take you back to maths class. I didn't even remember this from maths class, but you might. We're going to look at the equation for a straight line, which is y equals mx plus c. Now, the reason I'm showing you there is a much easier way to do this forecasting for me to get this value. But the reason I'm showing you this is so you start to understand what forecasting is kind of doing in the background of Excel. So this is our equation for a straight line. Now we've got y here. We know our y values, so we know what they are. We have our x values, so we know what x is in this equation. But the two unknowns are m and also c. Okay, so in order to construct our little formula down here using slope and intercept, we need to work out what m and c are going to be. So for m, we're going to use a slope function. Now, if you've never used slope before, all it does is it returns the slope of a regression line. So if you can imagine, again, a trend line, slope calculates the slope, essentially, of that regression line. So I'm going to say equals slope, open bracket. Now, the arguments that we have for this function are really, really straightforward. You can see here it's asking, what are the known y values? And this is why I've headed these x and y to make this a little bit easier for you to understand. So our known y's, we just select them. This is the data that we know, essentially. Comma. Then it asks for the known x's. So we just select our known x's. Close the bracket. Hit enter, that gives us our slope value. So we're going to plug that into our formula, which we're going to use down here in a moment. The final thing we need to work out is this c value. And this is using a function called intercept. Now, intercept function returns the y-axis intersection. Okay, now you may not understand that too much, but if you can imagine, again, a trend line. So I'm going to say intercept, and again, it's the same argument. So it wants to know the known y's, comma, and then the known x's. Close my bracket, hit enter, and it gives me a figure. So I can now utilize these to create essentially a little formula down here that's going to tell me what the forecast is if x is 13. And I'm going to use this little equation for a straight line. So what we're going to say is equals, now we're looking for y, so we want m first of all. So our m value is G7. Now, if I want to drag this down for more x values, I want to make sure that I lock this or make it absolute by pressing F4. We're then going to do multiplied by x, which is this value just here. We don't need to lock that one. And then we're going to do plus, and we want the value of c, which is this here, that intercept value. And again, if I'm going to drag this formula down, I want to make sure that I make that absolute as well. And hit enter. And it gives me my forecast essentially. So now if I was to add more values for x, so let's add down to 17, I can now drag this formula down or double click to autofill it down. And there is my forecasted values when the value is x is 13, 14, 15, so on and so forth. Okay, so that is a way that you can do a forecast using slope and intercept. Now, I will say the functions I'm going to show you in a moment don't require you to do all of this. They're a lot easier. But I like to show you that just to give you an alternative if you're using a version where maybe you don't have the forecast functions, but you do have slope and intercept. It's always good. But also to help you understand exactly what you're doing here. You're sort of trying to work out a straight line through your data as best as you can. And these are the two functions that can help you with that. All right. Let's move on to doing it a simpler way using Excel's forecast functions. So let's jump across to our next worksheet, FORECAST.LINEAR. So again, I have the same values in here. We have our X values, we have our Y, and I want to work out what Y is, but this time I'm going to use a forecast function. Now, if you're wondering where these forecast functions are kept in Excel, you'll find them on the formulas ribbon, and they actually come under this more functions area. They're under statistical. Okay, so you'll find all of your forecasting is located in here. So here are all the forecast functions. You'll also find in here intercept, which we just used, and also slope as well. Okay, so they're part of the statistical functions group in Excel. So we're going to use our forecast function. Now I'm actually going to do this up in the formula bar as opposed to typing it directly in the cell, because I find that the formula I'm typing covers up a cell that I need to click on. So I'm going to click up in the formula bar. We're going to type in equals. I'm going to start to type in forecast, and I'm going to use FORECAST.LINEAR. Remember, if you don't have that and you only have forecast, that's fine. It's the same thing. Now, again, we've got our arguments here. So we've got 3 arguments. We've got x, known y's, and known x's. So these are reasonably straightforward arguments for us to work out. So the first thing it wants is the x value. So for this one, that's cell C17. Comma. Known y's, again, we're just inputting all of the y's that we know. Comma, known x's, like so. And then I can close my bracket and hit enter. And it's going to give me the same thing. Okay, so I'm pretty much getting the same results as when I use that slope and intercept, but that FORECAST.LINEAR is a lot easier because you don't have to really work out the equation or anything along those lines. Okay, hopefully that's reasonably straightforward so far. Let's move on to our next example. Now with this one, I've removed X and Y, and we've got date and sales. I've just put X and Y at the top there, just as a little reminder, simply because when you're using the function, it says known X's, known Y's. Sometimes if you get confused, it's a bit easier just to put X and Y at the top. You can always delete them later, just to remind you as which column is which. So this might be this is sales data. So essentially, and for my people joining us today in the UK, you'll notice that these are actually in American format, the dates. So in the UK, we write the date backwards, or maybe you guys write the date backwards. I don't know which one it is, but these are in the American format. So I'm basically taking a reading of my sales data on the 1st of every month. So we have a reading on January the 1st, a reading on February the 1st, so on and so forth. So this sales figures are essentially for the month before. So if I'm taking a reading on January the 1st, these are essentially going to be the sales figures for December 2017, so on and so forth. And what can I see by looking at this data? Well, I can see that it goes all the way down to June 2019. And I can just, by looking at these figures, I can see that roughly sales are increasing as the months pass. So maybe what I want to do is work out what the sales are going to look like for the next 3 months. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we've got a little bit more room. And I've got X and Y listed at the top here. And again, we can use our FORECAST.LINEAR function. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this in a slightly different way and show you how you can make it a little bit easier using named ranges. So first of all, I'm going to add in the dates. So I'm just going to drag this down. Let's do it up until, let's do it for the next 3 months. I want to work out the sales figures for July, August, and September. Now, before I start to construct my forecast, I'm going to name my known X and Y's. So I'm going to grab and drag down, and in the name box over here, I'm going to call this known underscore Y's. Now, you can call these whatever you like. You might just want to call them sales. That's fine. Hit enter, and I'm going to do the same for the dates just here, and I'm just going to call those known underscore X's and hit enter. So now when I'm constructing my forecast function, it's a little bit easier because I can use the named ranges as opposed to having to select the cells every single time. So again, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to type in forecast and we're going to select FORECAST.LINEAR. The value of X, well, it's going to be this one here, C23. Comma, it now wants the known Y's. So instead of selecting these, I can utilize my named ranges. Now, when you've set up named ranges in Excel, a quick way to pull up all of your named ranges is to press the F3 key on your keyboard, and any named ranges you have will show in here. Okay, So I need to select, I can't remember which one it was now, known wise, that's it. Let me pull those again. Known wise, that's my range. Comma. I can now press F3 again, and I can utilize my known X's named range. And as I said again, you didn't have to call them that. You could call them sales and date to make it a little bit easier to read. Close my bracket, enter, and I get my result. And again, I can double click to autofill that down. And very quickly, I've managed to predict what my sales are going to be for the next 3 months. Hopefully that's making sense to everyone so far. So reasonably simple. Now, I will say with these forecast functions, again, if I type this in, you can see that there's lots of them in there, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, what do all of these other ones do? And I would advise you to, have a little play around with them, see the differences that you get when you use each one of these. If you want to know a little bit more information about exactly what each of them do, I would always advise you to check the help file. So if I go up to at the top here in Excel, I have this little search bar. I'm just going to type in forecast. And you'll see right at the bottom, it says get help on forecast. And this can sometimes be really, really useful because it's going to pop open that help screen and it's going to show you all of the different types of forecast function. You can click on them and then you can read up exactly what that does. You might find that for the data that you're using, you might find that FORECAST.ETS is more relevant for the type of data that you use if you have seasonal data, things like that. So I always advise people to jump across to help to check out the details of each of them. So we've dipped our toe into slope and intercept, 2 new functions. We've also had a look at FORECAST.LINEAR, and we've seen how we can utilize named ranges when we're doing our forecast to make it a little bit more efficient and easier to read. I'm going to show you one more way which you can forecast, and that is by using the trend function. Now, again, this might be a function that you have never used before. And when you're using the trend function, we need to use this as an array function or an array formula. Now, if you're not familiar with what arrays are, I'm going to go off on a tangent, first of all, just to show you what an array formula is, so you understand it when we use it when we're doing our trend forecasting. So I have another little spreadsheet here, which is completely unrelated to what we're doing, but it's just a really nice, simple way of explaining to you what an array formula actually is. At its core, an array formula allows you to perform multiple calculations all at once. And it looks very similar to a regular formula, but the main difference being is that instead of pressing Enter to confirm your formula, you press Control-Shift-Enter. That makes it an array formula. So you might still be thinking, well, okay, what exactly does it do? Well, let me just show you very briefly here. I've got a little table here. We've got some products, just some basic fruits. We have the amount sold, we have the price, and then we have the total. And you'll see here the total is calculated D5 multiplied by E5. So we're essentially multiplying the amount sold by the price in order to get this total. We then have, so we've worked out all of those totals, and then right at the bottom, we have essentially a grand total, which is summing all of these. Now, what I could have done here, instead of going to the effort of creating this formula, D5 multiplied by E5, copying it down, and then doing this formula, I could have got the total of 810 all in one go by using an array formula. Okay, so let me just show you how that would work. If I was to type equals sum, open bracket, what I could do is say, highlight the entire range, D5 to D10, multiplied by E5 to E10, close the bracket, and then to make it an array formula, so to do all of the calculations in one go, I would press Control-Shift Enter, and it gives me the answer of 810, which is this total here. So I've kind of missed out all of the steps. I haven't had to work out this. I've just got straight away the total. And what you'll notice is with an array formula up above, you can see that it's an array because it has these curly braces around the outside. Okay. So that's the concept of an array formula. And it's important to sort of at least understand that a little bit, because we're going to use it to use this trend function for forecasting. Now, the trend function itself isn't particularly complicated or confusing, but we're going to do it up here in the formula bar. We're going to type in equals trend, open bracket. Now, this should start to look fairly familiar to you. Known y's, known x's. So we want our known y's again, just here, comma. Known x's are these ones just here, comma. Now it's asking for the new x's. So this is what we haven't filled out yet. So it's going to be 13 to 17 or C17 to C21, comma. Now we have to add a true or a false argument on the end. And in this particular scenario, we're going to select true, because true means it's going to calculate as an intercept. And if you remember in that first example, the intercept is what we need in order to work out that forecast linear model. So we're going to add true on the end just here. Close the bracket. Now we're going to make this an array formula. It's going to do all of those calculations in one go. So we press Control, Shift, Enter in order for that to work. And again, you'll see that now the trend has those curly braces at the top. It's given me 107. I can copy this down and it gives me my results. Okay, so you can see that each time we're doing this, these results are pretty much the same. So I've shown you a few different methods there of how you can forecast using different functions in Excel. Hopefully everybody is still with me. Let's move across to probably what is the simplest way of forecasting in Excel, and that is one-click forecasting. Anything that says one click, I like, but I will say it is a bit of a lie, because it's not essentially one click. There is a couple of clicks, but I think the main point they're trying to make here is that it is super easy to forecast using this particular feature. Now, again, this one-click forecasting is better known as forecast sheets, and you'll find this option on the data ribbon over in the forecast group, this forecast sheet button just here. And what this essentially does is it just creates a new little worksheet and it predicts your data trends, and it gives you a lovely little graph as well, or a lovely little chart which you can modify and format however you like. And it's really just a really nice quick way of creating a forecast without having to type formulas and all of that kind of stuff. So let's take a look at our data. Again, this is fairly simple data. This is time-based data. And what I mean by that is that we have our dates and then we have some sales figures. And my dates here are evenly spaced. So I'm taking a reading on the first of every single month. And then I have my sales figures over here, which aren't necessarily evenly spaced like these dates are. But it is quite important to make sure that your dates are evenly spaced to make your forecast more accurate. Now, again, what I can see here is that the sales for this company are increasing as we go through the different months. Now, another thing that you need to note here is that you can have gaps in your data. So maybe you have a data set which isn't completely full. So you might have some missing sales figures for a couple of months. That's absolutely fine. In fact, you can have up to 30% of data points missing, and Excel will still be able to give you a reasonably accurate forecast. Okay, so if you have the odd figure missing, it's not too much of a problem. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to forecast up until the end of August. So essentially, my last forecast date is going to be the 1st of September 2019. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of my data here, like so, including the headings. I'm going to go up to the data ribbon and I'm going to click on Forecast Sheet. And you can see here, it pops up with this really nice little line chart. And it's worth noting that you can toggle between line charts and a column chart if you prefer. And what you'll see here is that your dates or your actual dates are shown in blue, and then your forecast is shown in orange. Now it's showing me up until the end of up until the 1st of November. And that's because underneath it says forecast end, and then it's got the date down here. So I can go in and change that because I only want to forecast up until the 1st of September. Okay, so you can change that forecast end. So now I can see what my forecast is going to be for the next 3 months. And what you also see just above here, and it's very faint, hopefully you can pick that up on your screen, is we have these what we call confidence bounds. They almost look like little error bars. They're a little bit easier to see if we switch to the line chart. So you can see here in blue, we have the sales figures that we know. We then have our forecast sales, which runs through the middle here, and then we have a lower confidence bound and an upper confidence bound. So this is kind of giving us a range, okay? Now, if we expand this little options area at the bottom, we have a few more options that we can essentially customize. So what I can do here is I can set my forecast start date as well. And you'll see that mine is starting where my last data point ends. So forecast start is June, sorry, I get so confused when the dates are the other way around, is the June the 1st. That's what I meant. Forecast start date is June the 1st. We then have our confidence interval. So as I said, you have a lower confidence bound and an upper confidence bound. And this confidence interval is the range surrounding each predicted value. So I have this set to 95%. So what Excel is telling me is that 95% of my sales figures are going to fall within this range. Okay. Now I could choose to turn those confidence bounds off simply by unclicking that. If I just wanted to see a straight forecast, I can do that. And I could also modify the confidence interval. So if I want to go up in confidence, so if I start to go up towards 100%, you'll see that that confidence bounds upper and lower get further apart. Whereas if I was to put the confidence down, they're going to get closer together. Now the default here is 95%, and I'm pretty happy with 95% of my sales figures. I have a confidence level they're going to fall within that range. We then have an option down here for seasonality, and mine is set to detect automatically. So seasonality is a number, so let's say a number of points of the seasonal pattern. And for the most part, it's automatically detected. So for an example, in a sales cycle or a yearly sales cycle, each point would represent a month. So the seasonality would essentially be 12. You might have a different seasonal pattern in your data. So maybe you have sales data where you have a sharp spike towards Christmas. Maybe you sell Christmas trees, I don't know, and you have, fairly poor sales for most of the year. But then as it gets towards Christmas, your sales start to increase. So maybe you want to set it to 4 for the 4 seasons of the year. It depends what your data looks like. Now, I'm happy with mine to detect automatically because I just have months of the year and sales data. I can also choose to include forecast statistics. Now, I would say that if you're really into your forecasting and you require a lot of statistical information, you could check this box and it's going to give you a lot of high-level forecasting information. I would say for the average person who just wants to kind of predict sales or predict stock prices, you're probably not going to need to include those statistics, but the option is there if you want to. We then have our timeline range. This is just our data range, our value range, which is just the ones I've got selected here, the date and the sales. When it comes to fill missing points, so again, we spoke about this earlier. I said to you, you can have missing data points up to 30%. And I like to have mine set to, and I can never say this word, interpolation. I don't know if that's right. interpolate those values. And what that basically means is that if I did have missing data, Excel is going to look at the values either side of that month and work out its best guess for that missing data. The other option I have in here is I could choose to fill those missing data points with zeros. I prefer it to try and guess based on the previous months and the future months. And then finally at the bottom here, we have aggregate duplicates. So you might use this if you have multiple readings on the same date. So an example of that might be a meteorologist who forecasts the weather. They might be taking a reading of rainfall on the same day, but from different sources. So what you can do is you can, if you have multiple values for the same date, you can essentially average those values, or you can choose to find the max, the min, the sum, so on and so forth. So lots of different options that you have in there. Now I'm going to keep all of these on the default, so I'm happy with my confidence level being at 95. My forecast end date is set correctly, and I'm going to say create. And you can see here exactly what it does. It creates me a brand new worksheet, which I can then rename, and it gives me my forecast. So helpfully, I now have all of my figures in a table. I have my historical data, and then I have my forecasted data. I can see forecasted sales, but I can also see the lower confidence bound and the upper confidence bound as well. And I also get that nice little line chart over at the side, which shows those details as well. Now, of course, with these charts, you can treat these as you would any other chart. So if you don't like this particular design, you have your chart design. You can change the colors. You can change the chart style. You can even change the chart type that you're using. Okay, so you can come in here and you can change the chart type to something else entirely. So that is quite a nice way of just with one click being able to forecast your data. Now, something else you might want to put onto this chart might be something like a trend line. So I'm quickly going to add one. I'm going to click the little plus. And when it comes to adding chart elements, I could go through and add a chart title, all that kind of stuff, but I'm just going to add a trend line. And it's going to ask me what data series do I want to add my trend line for. So I'm going to add the trend line for sales. I'm going to click on OK. And you can see there it's very close to my actual sales. But something that I wanted to point out to you here, because I think this is quite an interesting point, is I'm going to try and click on this trend line. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say Format Trend Line. Now what I'm going to do is you can see here I have my trend line options, and currently I have a linear trend line going on in my line chart. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down, and right at the bottom I have this option here that says display R squared value on chart. Now I'm just going to turn that on for 1 second, and it gives me this little equation over here. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, why on earth is that useful? Well, I will tell you. When you're doing a trend line, the idea, or the one that's going to be most suitable or closest to your data, will have an R squared value closer to 1. So currently I have a linear trend line selected, and you can see the R squared value is 0.98. So that is pretty close to 1. What I could do is select exponential trend line, and I can see that that's still pretty close, but it's not as good as linear. Okay, I can then go through each of these trend lines. I can see that that one is further away, probably won't use that. This one here, again, I can't say this, polynomial, somebody can help me out with that pronunciation, but I can see that this one is the closest to 1, so that is going to be the most accurate trend line for my data. So sometimes I like to turn on that little R squared when I'm trying to work out what kind of trend line I want to use, which one is closest to my data set. And then I can delete that out afterwards. So that is pretty much everything I wanted to show you when it comes to forecasting. Hopefully we've covered a lot of the basics there. As I said, we could go into this a lot more. There are all those different kinds of forecast functions that you might want to utilize. But if you're simply somebody who wants to be able to predict sales or predict stocks, things like that, you're going to find something like Forecast Sheet really useful. Or even if you just want to use the FORECAST.LINEAR function, hopefully I've shown you how simple those arguments are. You just input your known values and it will do a forecast for you. I'm going to leave it there. I realize that was a little bit more mathsy than the webinars that we normally do.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get 4 free courses in Excel, QuickBooks, Microsoft Project, and Photoshop, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Sez IT.